Well, hey everyone, I am your host, Gentry, and welcome to the Vibrant Life Show. This show is all about exploring the purposes God has placed in our lives and the passions He's placed in our hearts to reach the community He's placed us in for such a time as this. So whether we're hearing stories of those living out their passions, helping you discover your purpose, asking hard questions, or leaning into cultural moments, the hope of this show is to remind us that the life that we are created to live is an adventurous one, a purposeful one, a meaningful one. We are invited to live the vibrant life. And I just am so excited about our show today because my friend Toni Nieuwhof is here in the studio. She is a speaker, an author, a co-host of the Smart Family podcast, and many other things in her life. I can't wait for you to hear all of the things that she's done. But we are going to be talking about how to improve your marriage, how to save your marriage over these next 2 episodes. And so be sure to tune in not only today, but next week, whether that's here on Faith Talk Radio in Arizona at 5 p.m. on Tuesdays, or on podcasts, Spotify, Apple, YouTube, wherever you find it. I know that this is going to be a help and a blessing to you, not only for those who are married, but for those who are hoping to be married. This is going to be so beneficial. And so, Toni, welcome to the studio today.
Oh, Allie, I can't tell you how thrilled I am to be here and join you. Woohoo!
I know, this is so exciting. We've talked about it for a while, but you are not from the United States.
No, we came down from the snowy north in Ontario. Mm-hmm. So I have to say this is a wonderful, beautiful shock to my system.
Yes, Arizona in February is what we think about in July here. We're just like, if we can just get to the winter, we'll survive. And you're probably a little bit of the opposite, dreaming of summer up there in Canada.
Oh, yes.
So we're happy. I'm so happy that you're here, Toni, and our friendship that the Lord definitely orchestrated that we could have never asked for, meeting at a women's conference or Women's Speakers Collective, shout out to them, and how we've connected. But why don't you share a little bit about what you've done in your life, the things that you've gotten involved in, and how it's gotten you to this point today as we're going to be talking about marriages.
Well, Allie, we met a few years ago at Long Beach, and that was like several years, decades actually, into our ministry in Ontario. My husband and I met at law school, and from there he experienced a call into ministry, so we traveled about an hour north of Toronto, and we've stayed there ever since. Mm-hmm. Started out at 3 small churches, and over the years I have actually continued practicing law. My husband was leading the churches in Oro, and in the mid 2015 or so, I found myself practicing as a family lawyer. Had never anticipated I would do that, but through several years in family law or divorce law practice, I saw a lot of things. Mm-hmm. I not only saw what happens on the other side of divorce very up close, but I also could have imagined myself as one of my clients because my husband Carrie and I went through many tough years in our own marriage. So yes, it has brought me to this point where I talk a lot about marriage. Mm-hmm.
Yes, so you have a lot of knowledge on it, experiential and otherwise. Yes. And that's where I am so excited, especially during this season. I mean, when this show is airing, it's in February. Relationships, it's heightened right now. We're talking about it. You're actually here for a panel at Arise, which is the organization that I'm honored to run here in Phoenix, the Once a Month Women's. You're going to be on our panel speaking on these things as well. I mean, relationship, it's just focused more so right now, but it's relevant always. Mm-hmm. And I have it in front of me if you want to look it up, but it's Before You Split is the book that you wrote, and this came out a little over a year ago?
It did, yeah, January 2021. And it's the official birthday.
Yes, I was so excited to see this and actually have it in my hands. I know that this was a labor of love for you. So what got you to the point of saying, I feel like I need to put this down in writing and form these thoughts for people? Can you take us behind that process and what your hope was for this?
Sure. Well, my husband Carrie is not only a church leader, but he also works in the church leadership space, and he has a blog and a podcast. And it was over a conversation at dinner one night with his book agent, where they were talking about the details of his book. And she turned to me and said, "Okay, Toni, I want to hear more about your story." And she ended up saying, "You have to write a book about that." And she was talking about my divorce law practice and what I'd observed and what I was learning. And I thought, "Oh, you're a book agent. You say that to everyone."
I would assume the same thing.
So a few months later, she crossed paths again, and she said, "Where's that book proposal?" And in the meantime, I had started praying about it because I wondered, whether that was something I should do. But there's a distinct memory I have of a client who was in my office. He had gone through the whole divorce process, and for him it had been complicated. It was a tough go. He had 3 kids. He was a businessman, and he was signing off the final paperwork. And he looked at me in the eyes, and he said, and he looked at me with tears in his eyes, actually, and he said, "If only I'd known then what I know now, I would have worked harder to save my marriage."
Wow.
And he wasn't the only client who said that or something like it. So having gone through many rough years in our own marriage, but having come out on the other side before I started practicing in family law, but then also hearing the disappointment and regret from some clients who found that their divorce just didn't unroll the way they thought it would. They'd had conversations beforehand. They thought, well, X, Y, and Z, this is what's going to happen. But then when the actual day of separation happens, it's a different day. Mm-hmm. And their perspective changes. And if anyone listening right now has gone through a divorce, I'm sure that they can identify, and my heart goes out to anyone who's listening who has gone through the pain of a divorce. So I felt a sense of urgency. I felt I needed to expose the options a little more clearly, give more of a window into what actually does happen on the other side of divorce and what is it that you need to have in mind, particularly if you have kids. And as well, when Carrie and I went through that long, rough season, by the grace of God, he took us step by step by step to a far better place. I can honestly say that our marriage is thriving now, whereas back then I didn't know how we were going to make it. And there's some things we learned along the way. And so I touch on many of the different areas where there are potential solutions, and I really like to provide them as a menu for people who are, either looking to improve their marriage or wondering whether they're going to make it, right. So that there's so that you can have hope that maybe we should give this a second try.
Right. When I look at you and Carrie now, which I've been honored to be around you both, I would have couldn't have guessed that you guys went through a period like that. And as pastors, really leading a big church in Canada, at the same time trying to navigate a marriage that you just didn't know how it was going to work. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned just a minute ago, you said to expose the options for people. And what I'd love to focus in on is, so many people are feeling, I actually love this title, Before You Split. It's to get this in the hands before you get to this moment where you're saying this guy is looking in your eye just being like, wow, if I'd only known, or maybe tried harder or done some things along the way that could have kept me from this position. And you said to expose the options. And one of the things that I love the most in this book, and I never heard it this way, and as a single person, I read this book, I gained so much information and insight and wisdom from it, even going forward, that I'm so glad I just have it in the bank now. I have it in my tool belt. So this book is for anyone. But one of the things that I loved were how you, I'm going to say split again, but you separated these 3 options, split, survive, save. Could you go into that as you talk about exposing options? What are the options people really have when they're like, I'm in Mayday mode right now. I need help. Can you speak into that?
Sure. So split, I think, is obvious. People know, and I'm sure if you're listening and you haven't gone through a divorce, you've actually known somebody close to you who has. As far as surviving goes, I say that's the state where you are together, you're still in your marriage, but you're emotionally disconnected. Because, as humans, love and connection is an ancient wired-in survival code. Mm-hmm. A marriage expert, Dr. Sue Johnson, talks about this. We're wired for love and intimacy. But let's face it, our journeys that bring us up to the place of marriage don't always set us up for that kind of connection. So it's, and marriage over several years can get complicated. Mm-hmm. So, most of us run into rough patches, if not all of us. So surviving is that place where you feel like you've drifted apart, or you're living as roommates, or maybe it kind of feels like a business contract where, I get to do ABC and you get XYZ, and we kind of have this contract worked out so that we can, make this work. Mm-hmm. But that connection, that heartfelt connection, we have to pay attention to it, because if we don't, and when we're in a relationship like a marriage that is supposed to be intimate, but that is missing, it creates a pain. And that pain eventually will leak out somehow, whether it's in the form of an addiction or a mental health problem or, too much shopping, spending, whatever it is. The pain is going to leak out somehow. And I want to tell anyone who's thinking about this and wondering, am I in that place where I'm just surviving? Not to panic. If you reflect about this and you're thinking, maybe we are actually in that place, I want to give you the hope and the encouragement that you can move from surviving to saving your marriage. So saving is where you are in a marriage and you have that feeling that there's the love that you're looking for, that you have each other's backs. And no, it doesn't mean things are going to be perfect. You are certainly, if you're like us anyway, we still have our differences. We can still have our odd blowout. But that fundamentally you have each other's backs and you're satisfied, hopefully even deeply satisfied with your marriage.
Right.
That's what I would call saving your marriage.
And so when people look at, the first step would probably be to locate themselves within that, or how would you suggest people when they see those options to dive into each one and then the next step from there?
Sure. Yeah. So I know what it's like to be in that place where you're wondering, you're struggling so deeply. We got caught in this vicious cycle of conflict. And so, I wondered, is it even possible for us to ever be in love again? Or have I just signed up for a lifetime of misery? And so if there's anyone listening who maybe can identify with those thoughts, right. My message really is to just slow down. Like, let's slow down and let's step back and see what else might be going on that is leading you to be ambivalent about your marriage. If you're in the surviving place, there are ways to work on your connection, on your self-personal work together in your marriage, to take steps away from that feeling like you're disconnected. It's actually more common than you might think. Like, I've surveyed a couple of church groups about their top issue that they're struggling with. And I thought it might be parenting issues or finances, but I've actually found that feeling disconnected also rises to the top.
Wow.
So there are ways that there are strategies, like very practical strategies you can use to move yourself away from surviving and into developing that or rebuilding that connection that you're really looking for.
Right. And we're, if you're just joining us, we're on the Vibrant Life Show with Toni Nieuwhof, and she is walking us through steps and options that we can take, especially if you're in this mode of being like, I have to save my marriage right now. And she's talked through locating where we are, split, survive, and save. And so when we are looking at that and you're saying, okay, so now we're looking at everything that's going on here and we might need to take steps to get there. Are there some individual and together? Would you suggest, how have you watched even counseling play into this as people try to navigate either surviving or I don't even know if this is a savable, I don't even know if this is salvable, I don't know where I am. How does that step play into it? Should it all be together or should there be an individual part of that as well?
Yeah, that's a great place to start thinking about it. For us, it was both and. Mm-hmm. And I think for many people, if you go through a long, rough season in your marriage, chances are it's complex. There are multiple things going on. I would say you can maybe think of it as this tangled ball of yarn. It's going to have to be untangled somehow, but it's going to be messy.
Right. Yes.
So for us, we both came into the marriage with our own individual traumas. We didn't realize it. I think often when you're married and you're starting off in life, particularly if you're maybe in your 20s or early 30s, you may be bringing trauma into your marriage that you've been blind to. You have no idea it's there. And that was certainly the case for both Carrie and I. So when we started to struggle to the point where we thought our marriage was under threat, I started going to counseling first and definitely needed to do some individual heart work, some inner healing work. And I wanted Carrie to join in. And at first, he was hesitant to do it. Now, this was many years ago, so I think now there's less of a stigma attached to counseling. But I do still hear people who really don't, are not in favor of going to counseling for themselves. Like, I send people to counseling. I don't go to counseling.
Yeah. I send people there. I do my work.
So it's important to get past that internal resistance because Carrie and I both found that it's so invaluable. And he's an advocate, absolutely, right now. He would say, just get over it. Mm-hmm. A counselor, when you think about it, they've gone through years and years of training. They've got experience. They've helped hundreds, maybe thousands of people see their issues and move past them. If you want to move further faster in your healing process, it really helps to have somebody who can give you a better window into what you're missing. Right. So chemistry is important. And, on the whole topic of counseling, I do want to say that from a divorce lawyer's perspective, I don't think there was a client I talked to who didn't tell me that they tried marriage counseling. So usually I asked a few questions. I mean, we ask tons of questions in a law office. So I asked them what their counseling process looked like. And usually when I probed deeper, it was maybe 1 or 2 sessions. And then somebody heard something they didn't like, or they felt that the counselor and their spouse were ganging up on them, and they left. So somebody got pissed off and left. Mm-hmm. And I would really encourage anyone who's struggling in their marriage and seeing that dynamic at work to take a deep breath. If you find that maybe there was a lack of chemistry with your counselor, then it's perfectly fine and absolutely worthwhile to check a few references, look around, book an appointment with someone else, but just to have some perseverance in that process because it can be a game changer. It certainly was a game changer for Carrie and I.
Right. And having other when people get to look in when they're not actually emotionally involved is so helpful.
Yes,
And
it's more objective.
It's so much more objective and can help, but it does take that commitment to at least go for a certain amount of time.
Yes.
If not, and how much that can really help along the way. I mean, I've had so many conversations of how that actually, when they found the right person and they stayed with it, how critical of part of their marriage survival into the savings piece that it actually played. But what would you say, Toni, if someone was like, I want to save my marriage, I want to, but I just don't know if they want to. How would you have them approach a situation like that?
That's a tough spot because it's easy to start feeling vulnerable when you have that desire, but you're just not sure whether your spouse has the same desire, or whether they're looking into the marriage, are they looking out. It can be very confusing. I would say that that's a time where you don't want to respond to your own emotional hesitation. I say don't play it safe.
Okay.
So playing it safe may look like standing back and waiting for your spouse to make the first move, or, pointing the finger and responding tit for tat. That kind of dynamic is very easily just pops up if you've been in a season of conflict and you've got mutual hurts and probably mutual grievances. So I've heard Gary Chapman talk about see what you can do in love for a defined period of time, and see how your spouse responds, because you're disrupting the current pattern and putting yourself out there may have more influence than you think.
Wow.
And you may have that feeling of, well, if I do this loving thing and it just gets thrown back in my face, or they're bitter anyway, or I end up feeling like a doormat, well then what? But I would say, on the other hand, I look to the wisdom of Psalms, and in Psalm 126, verse 6, there's a verse that goes like this. It says, "Those who go out weeping, carrying seed to sow, will return with songs of joy, carrying sheaves with them." And it's like, just in a nutshell, it describes the protagonist, the farmer, weeping and carrying these seeds out to sow in the ground, not receiving an immediate benefit, but later on, when the harvest is taken, returning with abundance, with the sheaves. And it's to me a very poignant reminder that when you step out and sow seeds in love, even when you might be sowing those seeds into the cold, hard ground, that might be what it feels like. You may feel like you're weeping. Well, you may even feel like you're lacking integrity with your own emotions. Like, if I'm not doing this and feeling affectionate at the same time, am I selling myself out? But I would say no, you are making the decision and acting on your will to love in your marriage, planting seeds of love and focusing on the harvest. Because God's promise is that when we follow that path and we extend ourselves and push past the resistance and sow those seeds in love, then you will reap a harvest. You don't know exactly where the harvest will appear, but you will reap a harvest. And so my hope for anyone who's listening, who's in that position, who's not sure what to do next, I would just encourage you to plant those seeds in love, and then follow God, listen to God, and wait on that promise of abundance.
That's so good, Toni. I just feel like I went to church. I mean, that applies to so many situations of sowing that, even when it feels like it's cold, hard ground. And just trusting that when you sow it in love and in marriages, that God, no matter what the outcome is, that God won't return void, and He will meet you in that space. And that's such a beautiful encouragement to continue to step out, be vulnerable. And I love how you're saying, if that's where you are, that actually could do more to show that you're willing to be vulnerable still for someone and how they're feeling too. So this has been such an awesome conversation. There's so much more to go. That's why we're doing a part 2 next time. And Toni, if people could, if they want to get in contact with you, whether it's for speaking, your podcast, to reach out, to get on your email list, how would they do that? What's the best way?
Probably my website. Now, my name is a bit tricky. Toni Nieuwhof, but Nieuwhof has way too many vowels.
It does.
So look up Before You Split book and you'll find my name.
Yeah, so it's Before You Split by Toni Nieuwhof on Instagram at Toni Nieuwhof. And we're so excited to continue this conversation. But Toni, thank you so much for your insight, your wisdom, and how marriages can really live into this vibrant life that God has for us. Thank you for joining me on the Vibrant Life Show. I would love to connect with you and get to know you. My favorite place to hang out is over on Instagram at ali.gentry or over on Facebook. You can also go to my website, aligentry.com. That's ALIGENTRY.com. Sign up for my newsletter to stay up to date and get links to the show on all platforms after we air, the show's YouTube channel, and really just all the things. I am so honored to get to hang out with you today. My heart is that you remember that each day is an invitation to live the vibrant life.